you think the Switch Mini/Pro will cost? Thanks, Heart. So I'm not entirely sure, because it depends on the logic that Nintendo wants to do with this and what exactly the role of a Mini or Pro will do. And this is even working off the idea that Mini and Pro are happening for sure. These are all still very heavily rumored. Now, if they are both happening, it's not one or the other, they are happening simultaneously, I think it's more likely that the Mini is going to be a more affordable version of the Switch, maybe something that's only going to be $200, at most $250, and then a Pro option, instead of necessarily being like a premium Ultra version that's going to cost more money than a regular Switch, I think it's just going to be something that's a bump up and replace the regular Switch line and it being priced at the same normal price point of $300. Now, of course, there's the possibility that these are not things happening simultaneously right now. I think more likely we're seeing a Mini up front first. There's been rumor that Nintendo is working on a new version of the Switch, but that's a little further ahead in history, and if that's the case, a higher price point is possible if it's not just a refresh, but instead a more serious upgrade. What's your favorite video game of all time, and what's your favorite Nintendo Switch game? All right, so I have to preface basically, anytime someone asks me my favorite, especially when it comes to games, I am terrible at favorites. This answer will probably change every time you guys ask me, or at least it's going to be rotating out of like the same 3 or 4 possibilities. For favorite game of all time, I think I'd have to go with Chrono Trigger. That's usually one of my safe answers. That's just a game that was huge for me. I'm a big fan of JRPGs, and something about the magic of that game for its time on the SNES, it just hit so many different things well at the same time. The music, the visuals for its time, the gameplay, everything was just so awesome. Not to mention it was this whole just dream team effort of people that worked on Final Fantasy, people that worked on Dragon Quest, bringing all their stuff together, and it just right. As for Nintendo Switch game, it's a little tougher because there's a few different ones I like, and stuff that I've done recently. This is probably a little bit too much of a boring safe answer, but Breath of the Wild. It's a really good Zelda game. I don't know what to tell you. Like it did such a great job of bringing back that kind of classic approach to Zelda, where it's more of just wander around and figure stuff out instead of being a super linear adventure, which was still good about some of the other Zelda games, but having that kind of freedom brought back and this massive explorable area with mechanics that really differed from anything they'd done in the series before, I just loved it so much. Sony recently discussed some PS5 specs, like having the fastest SSD, ray tracing support, 8K, and so on, which sounds expensive. How much of a price bump do you expect over PS4, which launched at $400? So here's the thing with console prices. It's a little hard to figure out right now based on what Sony's willing to do, but I definitely think it's going to be more than PS4. So normally the logic with companies is that when you're selling systems, you sell them at a loss. And sure, you're not making as much money as you could be if you were overpricing them, but you're gonna make all the money you lose back by people that buy the system at that more affordable price point, and then they buy games, controllers, accessories, all kinds of stuff, and that's where the real profit comes from. So with that in mind, while yeah, the PS5 sounds really expensive, I don't think necessarily it's going to be you're paying the full value of those parts altogether, but I think it is going to be more than the PS4. I hope that it's about $500, which is definitely more, although not too much crazy more when you put inflation into account. But I think that's still within what a lot of people would see as something that, yeah, I'd pay that much for a system. However, with how expensive everything is starting to kind of sound, at least based on what they've been hyping up so far, and the fact that the PS4 has been doing really well, so Sony's kind of riding that wave of success, I wouldn't be too shocked if we saw an even higher price point. I really hope we don't, because if it starts hitting something like the $600 price area, that's going to be really expensive and might be a recreation of the entire problem that happened with the PS3, where it sounded great, but then too high of a price point scared a lot of people away, right into the Xbox. Do you think PlayStation will ever do another handheld? That's rough, because the PS Vita did not do great for them. I mean, the PSP wasn't an amazing success either, but at least did well. Especially in the States, the PS Vita just bombed hard. And that's not me saying that it was a bad system, just no one cared. So with that in mind, I feel like right now Sony's a little scared of focusing on doing another platform like that, especially how that one ended. I think more likely we're going to see them try to focus a little more on some of the stuff they've been actively doing with the PS4, with the concept of remote play, where it's like, hey, you can do this on your phone, you can do it maybe on tablets or other kind of accessories. Something similar to what Microsoft's been talking about with their cloud gaming, but a focus more on using your own system as a server instead of there being some other service somewhere. I don't think it's necessarily completely impossible that they will never do another handheld. I just don't see them being really encouraged to do so right now because it just has not worked out for them. And honestly, I liked the PlayStation handhelds. I really enjoyed the library on them. Like I was saying with like my favorite games, I love JRPGs, and that's a genre that did really, really well on the PSP. Not quite as much on the Vita. There were a couple good hits, but it was really strong on the PSP. So I like those handhelds. I wouldn't necessarily mind seeing another one. I just don't see it in the cards. By the way, if you're looking for a way to see what I'm up to or other ways to ask me questions, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all of which are linked down below. Do you want there to be N64 and GameCube games in the Nintendo Switch Online subscription thing? Yeah, that'd be cool. I don't really have a good reason why I wouldn't want those things there. I love a lot of N64 and GameCube games. I think that while the overall libraries definitely have some hit and misses, the hits that are there are incredible. If I had a way to be able to play stuff like Ocarina of Time or Star Fox 64 on my Switch, I would absolutely love that. And GameCube, even more so. I mean, there's a lot of classics from that system that are hard or really expensive to get nowadays. So if I could play like the Fire Emblem game from GameCube on my Switch, awesome, super cool. Do I think Nintendo's going to do that? I have no idea. There was a lot of rumor about SNES games coming to subscription, and then there was never actually an announcement about it when we thought there would be, and there's been no word since. So, I don't know. I don't know what Nintendo's really planning to do with their subscription service in the long run. I think all of this would be a great idea to make it a lot more worth it. I just don't know if that's actually the steps they're gonna take. Why do you love the Switch so much? Because it's cool? Okay, why do I love the Switch so much? It's got a great library of games. It allows me to play both handheld on TV. It's good. I'm not really sure if I need to give any more extra justification for this. I mean, it's really good. Do you think that Nintendo is getting ahead of themselves by releasing, supposedly, 2 new Switches? One this year and one probably next year. It depends on what exactly those new Switches are. I mean, if it's something that's meant to be like a whole new version that completely changes things and now you have to get brand new games that only work for that version, yes, I think that's happening a little too soon. But if these are just system refreshes, this is about the right time. I mean, especially if you compare the Switch to Nintendo's history with 3DS, not their mainline systems, they would do refreshes like this pretty quickly, especially if all it is a slimline version or something that's meant to be a more affordable option. I mean, really, look at the history of the 3DS. That system ended up having basically 6 different versions over time, including new versions, 2DS, XL, so on and so forth. So with how many times they did that in the time span of its life, the Switch getting 2 new versions starting 2 years after the system first came out, I don't think it's that crazy. What is your favorite Switch game under $20? That's harder to do off the top of my head. I'm doing all these questions right now just in the moment, and so I need to remember what things cost. Okay, a game that I'm pretty sure is under 20, it might actually be even under 10, but I love a lot, is Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon. Now, Bloodstained is kind of a weird situation because it's a spin-off game of a Kickstarter game that isn't actually out yet. If you guys don't know what it is, Bloodstained: Ritual of the Night was this really successful Kickstarter for a game from the guy that did later Castlevania games, and this is his way of making a new Castlevania game not under Konami. It's just that with a fresh coat of paint, different characters, whatever, but it's that same style of game. So as a tie-in with it, they had this other company, NT Creates, who makes a lot of retro-style games. They had to make an even older school-style Castlevania game in the vein of ones made for like the NES called Curse of the Moon. And it is so good. It's this great, like it captures what was really cool about those older games, but also updates and changes it a little bit to where it actually feels like something that's a little fresh and new and a bit more user-friendly. They even have different difficulty options. You can play like the more classic hard difficulty where if you get hit by an enemy, you go flying back and you'll probably fall in a pit and get really angry, or you can do a more beginner-friendly mode where you just don't flinch at all, so you're usually safe, you can get hurt. Just a lot of stuff it did smart that's both inviting to new people, but awesome for fans of the old stuff. I cannot recommend it enough. What other Microsoft games do you think will be coming to the Nintendo Switch? Well, I think the really heavy emphasis here from Microsoft's standpoint would be things that make sense on the platform. I don't think we're going to see things like the new Halo game or Gears of War make its way to the Switch, because those games are ones that really focus on pushing graphics, and it's not going to translate necessarily very well to the handheld experience of the Switch. On the other hand, a lot of the more indie-style focused Microsoft games, as we know, Cuphead's already coming to it, I think the Ori series, there's a lot of potential there for games that make sense on the Switch and just feel right at home. There's also the possibility that we're just going to see more Microsoft-produced games coming out that embrace a little more versatility in this sense, because one of the big focuses at E3 a couple years back was Microsoft being like, hey, we're acquiring all these studios, there's going to be all this new stuff in production, and we didn't really get any hard news on what that new stuff was going to be just yet. But if they're starting to open up the doors a little bit more to where their games are going to start being in other platforms, a lot of the stuff in development might be focusing less on being huge AAA productions with the shiniest graphics possible, but instead be more smaller, focused experiences along the lines of what Cuphead and Ori have done. Could you show the curved Joy-Cons with them attached to the Switch? Sure? Rich, can you go grab that? I'm just going to wait here for Joy-Cons. Is that all I need to do? Is that okay? Next question. Do you think Cuphead/Mugman will be in Smash? I really hope so. I think there's a lot of possibilities of who could make their way over to Smash based on the DLC we have so far. I mean, just looking at the fact that we just recently got Joker, who's the only confirmed DLC character, that's a really out there choice. I mean, there's no actual official Persona game on the Switch just yet. We are getting the Dynasty Warrior style one, which will be on that system, but actual straight up regular Persona 5 is not on the Switch. And before we get any game at all, he's already made a presence in it. So that opens up a lot of possibilities of who could get added. If we do get some kind of representative for Microsoft, I think Cuphead would be a perfect choice. I mean, so much of it just writes itself right away. You have Mugman as an alternate skin. They both have like a black and white version, mix in a couple other colors for other choices. Their moveset could be kind of similar to Mega Man, and there's a lot of ranged moves that work as regular attacks, but then they have some of their own spin on stuff. It's just, a lot of it is really simple and straightforward. If we didn't get Cuphead or Mugman, I would still hope there's some kind of cool Microsoft crossover, because I think that just opens up the roster even more in ways that would really shock people. I think a kind of runner-up possibility could be Ori, which is also rumored to be making its way to Switch at some point. That would also be really cool. But I don't know, I just like the idea of something Microsoft in general coming to Smash. Does Sega do what Nintendo don't?
What Nintendo don't?
It did at one point. I mean, I guess it's also doing it at this point because there's not actually a console around anymore. Fun fact about this line, though, because I was just recently studying about the entire console war of SNES versus Genesis. At the time when they were releasing the Genesis and they got a new head for Sega West, which was Kalinske, the Sega head at the time hated the phrase, "It does what Nintendo don't." And this was a slogan that was made by the guy before Kalinske, and the reason why the Sega guy hated it was because what does that even actually mean? It's this phrase that's kind of catchy and does have kind of a coolness factor to it, but it only really works when you're actually beating the opponent and not when you're just trying to compete against them and not really known yet. In fact, he even made the joke of, oh, what does it do that Nintendo don't? Does it just not sell? And Nintendo does? Is that how this slogan works? Because we're not selling yet. As for whether or not it does what they don't anymore, we have a new Sonic game coming out, and I guess Nintendo doesn't do that directly, but they're getting it.